For a lot of us as kids, buying a game could be a complicated process. First problem, money, something kids tend to not have very much of. And second problem, getting a ride to the doggone store. If you wanted to go somewhere before you could drive, whether it be your friend's house or the game store, you had to rely on those who could drive. And sure, sometimes you could get a ride no problem, but sometimes you could not. Well, as an adult, you probably have more money to spend on games and you don't even have to drive anywhere to get them. You can just buy your games online. So life couldn't be better, right? Well, like most things, some people will say yes, some people will say no, and some people will say it just depends. Perhaps the biggest concern that I see people having when it comes to buying games online is that they're worried they're gonna get screwed over. Not a very popular feeling. And remember, we're talking about buying older games online, so that's likely gonna be on something like eBay, where you're buying games from complete strangers. You could always look at something like a seller's feedback to see how reliable they seem, and while some sellers may take the possible threat of negative feedback detracting from their perfect 100% as an indictment on them as a human being, others do not. And what are you left with at that point? Well, what you're left with is some pretty powerful buyer protection policies that you'll find on a lot of these sites, such as eBay, to the point where it's really hard to get screwed over if you're a buyer. Sure, it could happen, but it's almost impossible. So let's say you buy a game and that game arrives and it's not what you were expecting. Well, eBay will make it pretty easy for you to get all of your money back and even force the seller to pay for you to ship it back. And they do this because they know they have to in order to be a viable business. To not do it would be like having a toilet but no plunger for it, which, by the way, lived a couple years of my life that way, and you want to talk about living on the edge. But here's the thing, just because you may get your money back in the end doesn't mean it can't still be a giant waste of your time. Quick little story for you. So I purchased this listing off of eBay once that's got all sorts of different video game items in it, and I'm looking forward to it. Well, what the seller does is they start to purchase each of the items in the listing individually, but cheap knockoff versions of them, and then mailing them to me. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on here? What is this all about? So they start arriving and I open them up and I'm like, yep, not real, not advertised. All of it is just junk. Well, you'd think, okay, well, no problem. You can get your money back, right? Well, problem is the seller kept uploading new tracking numbers. And so in eBay's mind, at least at the time I did this, what they said to me was, and I had to get on customer support to do this, always a good time. So I'm on customer support and they're like, well, there's a new tracking number. This one could be the golden goose and finally have what you actually ordered. And even though, of course, I knew that wasn't going to happen, I had to wait for all of that and deal with all of that nonsense before I could finally get my refund back. So, moral of the story is, even though the seller wasn't able to pull one over on me, they were still able to waste everybody's time. When it comes to the pros of buying games online, I think the biggest reason is a fairly obvious one, being just accessibility. You can find almost any game you can think of online, and I know that for me personally, and I'm guessing for some of you as well, that there's games in your collection you would just not own if you weren't able to buy it online. Because when you go online, somebody has the game, maybe they're across the country, maybe they're 50 miles away, but you can know that, you can track it down, and you can buy it. Whereas if you're looking around just your local town, if you can even find games at all, especially these days, there's no telling if you're going to be able to find that one specific game you want. Another really positive thing when it comes to buying games online that I actually find to be highly underrated, I almost never see this getting mentioned, is that not only can you probably buy whatever game you want online, but you can also most likely buy it in whatever condition you want it to be in. If you're out looking for games in the wild, who knows what kind of condition something's going to be in. even if you are lucky enough to find it. Another quick little story for you. So I go to the flea market one morning and I find something I can't believe is actually there. It's a region-free modified Sega Saturn, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Problem is, it was horribly discolored, and I was like, this is amazing, but I don't really want this if it's gonna look this ugly. Now, if you don't really care about the cosmetic condition of your game stuff, you just want to make sure it works, then yeah, that's not gonna be a problem. And honestly, those people might really be onto something, because you can save a ton of money that way, just in general. I should, however, mention that while you can see the condition of games you buy online before you buy them, what you can't do is smell the condition of games before you buy them. Now, for some people, the smell of cigarette smoke may not bother you, but for people where that smell does bother you, it tends to really bother you. And I tell you, I've gotten some stuff before where it looked great in the pictures, but then it shows up, and as I excitedly open up that package, right away a big waft of cigarette smoke smell comes blasting into my nose, and it's disappointing. Something else I've noticed can really bother people when it comes to buying games online is that they feel like they're paying the absolute highest price for the game, and that's no good. Although I should mention that some game stores will charge significantly more than the prices on eBay, although some game stores don't. They charge either equal to eBay prices or maybe even a little bit less, and I find people feel a lot better about giving their money to a game store than they do to an eBay seller, simply because a game store has gone through the trouble to rent a brick and mortar location, pay rent on it, hire employees, pay those employees, keep everything in stock, do everything that a game store does, and so you just feel better about giving your money to a place like that. Plus, going to the game store can just take you back to the good old days of actually going to the location where the game is that you're going to get. Going into that store, looking around, maybe a cover art sticks out to you. It's all right there in front of you. It's very physical. Whereas online, just scrolling through a web page doesn't always have quite the same magic to it. At the end of the day, I think that buying games online is not necessarily the most exciting, exhilarating, glamorous way to do it, but it is a way to do it, and for some of us, it might just be the best option that we have. And heck, for some people, if they live in a small town, there may not be any other ways to buy games. No game stores, no nothing. But with all of that said, for this video's question, what I want to hear is, what is the strangest interaction you've ever had buying something online from somebody? I would imagine some of you have got to have some weird stuff that you can share. Weird stuff that I want to hear. So, with that, leave your comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah. And he's talking about video games. He's the retro bird.